Today we talk about the fascinating world of twins. I'm Dr. Mark Amols, and this is Taco Bout Fertility Tuesday. Twins. I remember when I first found out I had twins, I thought, this is amazing. And to be honest, when I was younger, I used to think I would have twins. And it's funny because I hear that a lot. A lot of people think, yeah, I think I'm supposed to have twins, and they kind of dreamed of it. And I don't know if that's because for those of us who have infertility, we start thinking about twins, because for a patient who has infertility, twins is not something you're scared about. It's actually a blessing in some ways. You've worked so hard to get pregnant that if you get twins, you think, hey, 2 for 1 financially, but also, you know, your kid always has a friend because now they have a sibling. And so today I wanted to talk about twins from a different standpoint. I wanted to talk about twins from the standpoint of how common are they? What causes them? The science behind them, and why the medical community is so against them. The first part we should start with is, what does it mean to be a twin? Because we know there's these twins that are fraternal, and then there are twins that are identical. And the world's fascinated by twins. I mean, they have movies about twins. You got Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito doing a movie about twins. I think one of the first places to start is understanding the difference between fraternal twins and identical twins. Fraternal twins is what we call dizygotic twins, meaning from 2 different zygotes. Whereas identical twins come from 1 zygote, which we call monozygotic twins. Now, this seems like it's pretty self-explanatory. Most people should know the difference. But I actually have a very funny story. So years ago, when we had my daughters, everywhere we would go, everyone wanted to see them. And we were in the Mall of America in Minnesota. And this lady came up to us and said, oh, identical or fraternal? I immediately said to her, oh, they're identical. And then she said, same sex or girl-boy? It was at this moment that I realized not everyone understands the difference between dizygotic and monozygotic twins. Because if they were truly identical, monozygotic, there's really no way they could be 2 different sexes. And that's because they come from the same egg and same sperm. So they'll be the same sex. Now, yes, there can be developmental things that can happen, but in general, I realize that it's not as common of a thing people understand. So why did she ask it? Well, it's kind of like one of those things we just ask. When people are twins, you just go identical or fraternal. Just like when someone has a baby, you say, well, what was the weight? Why do you care about the weight? You don't really care about the weight, but it's just one of those things you ask. How big they were and stuff like that. Now, throughout the world, there has been an increase in twins. Now, the most common type of twinning is going to be fraternal twinning. This is a situation where a woman releases 2 eggs, and then you can get 2 pregnancies from it. Now, the more common cause of fraternal twinning in the world is because of 2 reasons. One is going to be infertility, having fertility treatments, and putting back 2 embryos or making multiple eggs with an IUI treatment. The other reason is that as women get older, their body starts to release more FSH and can sometimes cause an ovulation of 2 eggs, and that can lead to a higher chance of twins. As a matter of fact, in Nigeria, there is a higher risk of fraternal twinning, where 1 out of every 22 pregnancies ends up being twins. Now, what's interesting to understand about twins is that when you see fraternal twins, this runs on the female side. So a lot of times I'll hear people come to me and say, oh, well, my husband has twins in his family, so we have a higher risk of twins. That's not true. It doesn't run on the male side. It runs on the female side. So if your mother had twins, if you have sisters that have twins, then their babies will have a higher risk of having twins. And that is because they release more than 1 egg when they ovulate. Now, identical twinning is a little bit different. That really doesn't change between different cultures or different people. It's generally about the same, which is about 3 to 4 for every 1,000 pregnancies. But what's interesting is over time, as twins have increased, the increase is mostly from the fraternal twins, and identical twins have pretty much stayed about the same. Now, we have seen increase in identical twins in IVF treatments, and we believe that there might be some things with assisted hatching and ICSI that may cause a slightly higher risk of twinning. But in general, you are not wrong. You are seeing more twins, and that is because it has been increasing over the years. To give you an idea of the differences, back in 1970, there was approximately 18.9 twins per 1,000 births. Now in 2020s, there's 32.1 twin pregnancies per 1,000 births. Now, when it comes to fraternal twins, it's pretty obvious. There are 2 eggs, 2 sperm. These are 2 completely different humans. But when it comes to identical twins, monozygotic twinning, they are technically from the exact same DNA. But as you know, there's different types of twins. For example, you'll see twins that are in the same sac sometimes even conjoined. And so let's take a minute talking about how twins occur. So for fraternal, again, it's releasing 2 eggs, whether that is with medications such as Clomid or Femara, or whether it's just naturally. When it comes to monozygotic twinning, there are basically 4 different types of what we call placentation or presentations, which would be, one is called monochorionic diamniotic twins. There's another called dichorionic diamniotic twins. And then the last one's called monochorionic monoamniotic twins. So let's talk about each one of those. The first word is talking about how many placentas there are. So if it says dichorionic, it means there's 2 placentas. And the next part is talking about how many amniotic sacs there are. So if it's dichorionic diamniotic, it means they have their own placenta and they have their own amniotic sac. Essentially, all fraternal twins are going to have dichorionic diamniotic placentation. For identical twins, this is approximately 20 to 30% of the pregnancies. This is going to be one of the more safer pregnancies for identical twins and will have the same risk of basically fraternal twins because of the placentation. Now, the next category is going to be monochorionic diamniotic twins. So monochorionic meaning 1 placenta, diamniotic meaning different amniotic sacs. This makes up about 60 to 70% of the other type of identical twins. And this one does have more risk because they share the same placenta. And that puts them risk for twin-twin transfusion, which occurs in approximately 15 to 20% of the pregnancies. The last type of placentation is going to be monochorionic monoamniotic twins. And this is exactly what it sounds like. 1 placenta and 1 amniotic sac. This is one of the rarest forms of identical twinning, which occurs in about 1 to 2% of identical twins. And because they share the same amniotic sac, there's extremely high risk to these pregnancies, where approximately 50% of the pregnancies may end in mortality of the twins because their cords can twist between each other. But I said there was 4. Well, there is a 4th type, and that is going to be conjoined twins. Conjoined twins are always going to be monochorionic monoamniotic because to be conjoined, you have to be in both the same amniotic sac and the same chorion. When it comes to conjoined twins, it occurs only in about 1 in 200,000 live births. So it's very rare occurrence. There are risks, just like the monochorionic monoamniotic twins, but the cord getting twisted doesn't happen as much because they can't both move independently. But there are very complex medical cares and significant health challenges that they have. And so it also has a high morbidity mortality rate. So what makes one over the other? Is there something that happens? Well, there is. It has to do when the embryo splits. If the embryo splits in the first 3 days, it will be dichorionic diamniotic, meaning the embryo splits so early that the placentas and the baby amniotic sac are going to be completely independent of each other. And again, that occurs in about 20 to 30% of types of identical twinning. Now, if the embryo divides between the 4th and 8th day after fertilization, then this is where you get the monochorionic diamniotic twins. So the babies are in their own sac, but the chorion wasn't able to split because it developed a little bit later, and so now they share the same placenta. This is the situation where it's about 60 to 70% of identical twins, and has the risk of twin-twin transfusion, a higher risk pregnancy compared to like fraternal twins or dichorionic diamniotic twins. Now, if it splits between 8 days and 12 days, then there's a good chance they're going to share both placenta and amniotic sac. And this is the one I was telling you called monochorionic monoamniotic twins, which is rare, about 1% to 2% of identical twins, but carries significant risk due to the possibility of the twins' umbilical cords becoming entangled. And again, with a 50% risk of mortality. So it's very scary when we see this. Luckily, we don't see it that often. Now, if the split occurs after day 12, such as at 13 and past, then there is the risk of having conjoined twins. So as you can see, the splitting and the timing of the splitting is really what determines what type of placental amniotic division that will occur and whether you're going to have dichorionic diamniotic, monochorionic diamniotic, monochorionic monoamniotic, or conjoined twins. Some of these are just referred to as di-di, mono-di, mono-mono, or conjoined to make it simpler. So one thing that's really interesting about twins is the cultural perception of twins. Throughout the world, different cultures have different thoughts about twins. For example, in the Navajo culture, it's often regarded as a sign of great fortune. Some of the Navajo myths describe twins as children of the sun god, indicating their special status and divine origin. The Hopi people also hold twins in high regard, believing that the twins have a special bond with nature and the spiritual world. In Asia, Japan used to see twins as a bad omen due to the belief that they defied the natural order. However, over time, today twins are generally celebrated in that culture. But in China, twins are seen as a double blessing, particularly if they are a boy and a girl. The belief is that such twins, such as boys and girls, bring balance to the family. In South America, the Inca civilization believed that twins were sacred and had a special role in their society. In Europe, they were seen as possible connection with gods. And in other countries, they're believed to possess special spiritual powers. The point is, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. We all realize that twins are special. But unfortunately, sometimes double the joy also brings double the risk. Whenever I get asked, what are the risks of having twins? I tell everyone, it's easier for me to tell you what won't happen than to tell you what will happen. And that is, when you have twins, rarely do you get big babies because they're delivered early, and rarely do you get late babies because, again, they deliver early. But everything after that does occur at higher risk, meaning things from gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, birth defects, and almost anything you can think of increases with twins. Now, it's important to understand these are increases. They're still absolute small increases, but that changes the difference between the type of twins you have. If you have fraternal twins, the biggest risks are going to be preterm labor, and then the other risk is going to be an increase in all the general risks that come with pregnancy, such as gestational diabetes and preeclampsia and so forth. But identical twins have another risk that fraternal twins do not have, and that is twin-twin transfusion. We talked earlier about the placentas and how they can be di-di, mono-di, or mono-mono. Now, di-di amniotic twins, which are the less common ones, those are the ones that split within the first 3 days, are not going to have the risk of twin-twin transfusion because both of the embryos have their own placenta and own amnion. The risk of the cords getting tangled are very low because, again, they're in different amniotic sacs. So their risks are going to be very similar to fraternal twinning. But monochorionic diamniotic twins do have a higher risk of having twin-twin transfusion. As I mentioned, at least 15% chance of having twin-twin transfusion. This is the situation where if the embryo splits between days 4 and 8, now you have all the risks that come with twins, and you have an additional 15% risk of having twin-twin transfusion. And there are ways to treat that, which is beyond this podcast, but they're very difficult to treat. And basically, if it happens before 28 weeks, it can be very concerning. If it happens after 28 weeks, at least the baby can be delivered early, and so you can help. But some of the treatments they have out there don't always work and can even sometimes lead to mortality. Monochorionic, monoamniotic twins are the ones I always hate seeing because I know there's a 50% mortality rate. So now again, you have all the risk of having twins. You also have the risk of twin-twin transfusion. And now you have this high risk of the babies entangling the placentas, which again leads to at least a 50% mortality rate. As you can imagine, conjoined twins even have all these things and then added on to all the complexities of the medical complications that occur with it, depending on how they're connected. The good news is most twins do fine. And I don't want you to feel ominous just because you have twins, but there is this push in the society to reduce the risk of twins because with them comes complications. Twins need more prenatal care. They need a specialist usually involved. When it comes to delivery costs, it's much more expensive to have twins. Even hospital stay ends up being longer because a lot of times these babies are born early, and so they have to stay in the NICU or a level 2 nursery that costs more money. Even the type of delivery changes. A lot of the time, twin pregnancies end up in a C-section because of potential risk or if one baby is coming out breech. And so the reason why there is this community trying to reduce the risk of twins is because there is a risk whenever you have a twin pregnancy, both during the pregnancy and even at delivery. So there is this push to have single pregnancies, but there is also a push financially by a lot of insurances because they know there's a higher cost with twins. And so it's coming from multiple angles. In the end, we have got such high pregnancy rates now that I do believe it's always best to put back one embryo. Now, again, you can still get twins from splitting. And I still think there's a place to put back 2 embryos. But the biggest change I have had is that in the beginning, I didn't care if people put back 2 embryos. But now I realize there is actually an advantage to putting back 1 embryo, especially when you have few embryos. And that takes us to one of the last parts of this talk tonight, which is now you have this decision. Maybe your clinic does allow you to put back 2 embryos. Should you? And what I would tell you is this. Yes, putting back 2 embryos is going to give you a higher chance of coming away with 1 pregnancy. But if you only have 2 embryos and you put them both back and something happens, such as bleeding, some complication of pregnancy, and you lose both embryos, you have no more embryos. Versus if you put 1 back at a time, anything that happens to that embryo is not going to affect the other embryo, which means the cumulative pregnancy rate of putting back 1 embryo at a time will actually give you a higher chance of a live birth than putting back 2 at the same time. I don't regret my twins, and as a matter of fact, I'm so happy to have them. The purpose of this podcast today was to help people understand twins a little bit better, understand how they occur, and understand that there are risks and why there are different risks for different types of twin pregnancies. One of the things you're going to notice is more and more clinics are going to start going to single transfers. Not just because it's safe for the patient, but also because there is really a push, even from the insurances, making all clinics go to that. And although I don't like the idea of government or insurances telling people what to do, because we're adults and should be able to make adult decisions, I do have to at least take a step back and say it is the safest thing to do. For that reason, that is why I do tell all patients it's probably best to put back 1 embryo at a time. This doesn't mean there's not the times to put back 2 embryo. There are. And that's something you have to talk to your doctor about. And it's not wrong if your doctor decides to put back 2 embryos. They're allowed to do that. The point is that if it's a great embryo, it's always best to put back 1 at a time. And if it's a situation that there should be more than 1, then you're talking to your doctor and they're going over those risks or your situation of why more than 1 is better at that moment. Hopefully this episode was educational for some of you. Maybe one of you were one of those women I met at the Minnesota Mall of America. Either way, I hope you learned a lot from this. And maybe you have a friend who's interested in learning this topic. Tell them about it too. Maybe you have a friend who has twins or has a friend who thinks they're going to have twins. Maybe he's just going through fertility and is worried about twins. This podcast was specifically just to give some education. And if you do have twins, you're part of a special club. And as you know, in the world, your kid may be looked at as a god. What I can tell you is that you have in common with every person who has twins is you probably didn't sleep a lot in the first few years. As always, if you like the podcast, please tell a friend about us. Give us a 5-star review on your favorite medium. But most of all, keep coming back, and I look forward to talking to you again next week on Taco Bout Fertility Tuesday.